Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to talk about polyamory. And this stems from this video titled Me, My Husband, and Our Live-In Lovers. And we're going to kind of get to that video here in a little bit. First, we want to talk about what polyamory is, what it looks like, and most importantly, when it can work and when it can't work. And as we kind of talked about last week, part of our doing this is to kind of bring more openness to people's lifestyle choices, or to kind of, I guess, maybe get rid of some of the stigma around people who choose to live an alternate lifestyle, right? And so I think, Mark, you and I can both agree this is not a lifestyle either of us would ever be interested in living.
No, I think it's hard enough to have one relationship.
Exactly.
I really agree with what you're saying. And I am reminded years ago when I was doing my internship, I was at a place in Valley Mental Health here. And my supervisor, I can't remember the context of what I had said. It was probably about a client, but she said to me, Mark, there are many ways that people can be happy in this life.
Yep.
And I think that's true. And so I agree that, they make this choice and it may not seem like a valid choice for us, but they're happy. I mean, they seem happy.
Yeah.
And so I agree that, if we can take away this idea about judging, and I think in the video, it says love, not judgment or something that kept coming up. I can't remember.
It says love, don't judge. And it's this
love don't judge. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's this whole stream of videos. And I think that's really their point is like, hey, there are these people out here who live these alternate lifestyles. Please don't judge us.
I hope at the end of our episode tonight, that our listeners really understand that people can have different ways of living and they can be happy, and it may not be exactly the way we would live. And that's okay.
Yeah. And, I would even go so far as to say, it's okay if you disagree with this choice.
Sure, of course.
That's perfectly fine. It's okay to disagree with someone's lifestyle choices. It doesn't have to make them, as we talked about last week, a them, right? Yeah. It's all about getting rid of this us versus them mentality that we seem to be so stuck on, right? And so that's really what it's about, is we can all be an us, right? Make everyone an us. Okay, so let's talk about polyamory. What is polyamory?
So I really like that we're doing this because it helped me to get some terms straight. So some of the terms we're going to talk about polyamory, polygamy, and polyandry. Okay. And what is the difference between those two? So in short, polyamory is the act of having intimate relationships with more than one person at the same time. A polyamorous person might have or might be open to having multiple romantic partners. But the important point is it's always with mutual consent. It's open. Everyone involved knows what's going on. And there's certainly never any coercion, which I think we've talked about in previous episodes around sexuality. We did one on open relationships, or we talked about it at one time. And, again, that's a choice some people choose to make. There can never be any coercion, though. And I think the same in polyamory. So if you think about, what's the difference between polyamory and polygamy? And polygamy, at least the way we define it, is really about marriage. And so in some ways it's the same thing, where it's multiple people having multiple romantic and intimate relationships, but it's always within the context of marriage, whatever that means within that community, where polyamory isn't that way. And so like in the video, the one couple's married. I think the other one is not married, and then they're in the relationship altogether and certainly not married.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We typically think of polygamy as man having multiple wives, and polyandry is polygamy with the woman having multiple husbands, which doesn't occur that often, but it certainly does occur. So those are the different terms Go ahead.
Yes, and I know there is a polygamous society that exists, and I want to say they're kind of a fringe group from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. At least I know that there is a branch. So what I know about current church is that polygamy is not accepted. Like you are not allowed to practice polygamy in that religion. That much I do know. But
But there
there,
are some cultures where it's okay. So, for
yes.
instance, in the Muslim religion,
Oh,
would
okay.
certainly be okay. And so, if you think about historically, monogamy has really only been around for about the last 1,000 years.
Hmm.
And before that, probably the predominant form of relationship was polygamy, or in that case, polyamory, because probably marriage didn't exist. And so there are certainly cultures today that practice polygamy. You mentioned one, some offshoots of the LDS Church
Hmm.
as well, but Muslims certainly do
Okay.
it.
I didn't know that about Muslims.
Yeah. And then there may be other cultures as well. I would guess some of the native cultures in Africa probably practice it as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So, historically, if you go back far enough, then people were in multiple relationships, and monogamy is only fairly recent. Last week we talked about Robert Sapolsky, who's a biologist and studies the primates. And so I went to see what he says about this. And it's
Okay.
really interesting because if you look at from a primate point of view, or even just a species, you have what he calls tournament species and then pair bonding. So pair bonding is what the equivalent of monogamy,
Hmm.
and that exists certainly in primates. It exists in bird species. I mean, there are
Hmm.
species where that does exist. But then if you think about, say, elk or moose, they're probably more tournament where they fight. So the male fights for the right to mate, and they'll have several mates. And
Hmm.
I think lions are probably this way too,
I think
because they
so
have a
too.
pride.
Yeah.
They have one male and several females. And so he calls that a tournament species. But the interesting thing, so in tournament species, there are lots of mates, kind of like polyamory.
Hmm.
The males don't do much parental care. Mating is a function of male-male aggression, and males tend to be larger. But if you look at pair bonding, so
Hmm.
maybe the equivalent of monogamy, males and females mate and stay together. More parental care happens from the males.
Interesting.
Up at our cabin, there's a pair of woodpeckers, and you can tell they're mates, and they're babies in this tree that's right off our deck that we've watched for a couple of months now. And the male, I don't know which one is which, but they're both doing equal parental care. Mating is more of a function of female choice in pair bonding,
Interesting.
and males are more similar to females. But then he goes on to say, by all these different measures, humans fall right in the middle.
Yep.
And so I think that's the reason why there's some of us who are monogamous. There are some of us who might choose polyamory or polygamy. And so there's a wider range.
Yeah.
We do not fall squarely into one or the other of these categories. It's important to realize in polygamous cultures, many men are monogamous. And in fact, I think if historically, if you mentioned the LDS Church, I think a very small percentage of people actually, membership of the church actually practiced polygamy.
Yeah.
But it's also true that in monogamous cultures, many men are not monogamous, right? They're having affairs.
Uh-huh. Yes.
They just aren't open or on. Well, they're hiding it, and
Yeah.
so there's such a wide variation in how we approach, either monogamy or non-monogamous relationships. And so polyamory, what we're talking about tonight, is just one aspect of that.
Mm-hmm. And so, going back to when it actually works for a couple is you have to both 100% be
Oh
on
yeah.
board.
Oh
So
yeah.
like if one couple is even on the fence about it, you don't do it. And I would also say don't push it. Like don't try to push your partner into it, because if they're even a little bit uncomfortable, you just need to close that door and accept that this is your partner. That's who you chose to love, and that's who you chose to commit to. And that's what they want. Unless, you've had this conversation maybe beforehand. But I don't think it's fair to just all of a sudden after 5 years of marriage say, hey, I want to be polyamorous.
No. And one of the things, when I see couples where there's been an affair, the non-affair partner wants to know, did you love this other person, or do you
Yeah.
love this other person? And what I try and help them understand, I think as a species, as human beings, I think we have this almost infinite capacity to love other people.
Well, yeah.
And so monogamy becomes a choice.
Yes.
And it's about not opening the doors to, if you don't want to have a polyamorous affair, then you just keep that door shut.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that we don't have the capacity to love other people. And I think lots of times if people say, okay, I know this foursome in this example, the video, there are four adults. I really believe they have the capacity to love each other in very meaningful ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just because that's how we are as a species.
Yes.
And
And
so the other choices they have to make is, can we make this work? Which they talk about in the video, certainly.
yes. So let's dive into this video here. To make things simple, we're just going to, so there's Matt and Carmen, who is, I guess, they call themselves the original couples, right? So Matt and Carmen, we're going to call them couple A just to help keep things straight, because otherwise I feel like it's going to get really confusing.
It is. And
So
I got confused with OG. What does OG mean? Do you
it
ever?
means original couple. Like,
Why the
so
G though? I would say OC, but anyway, I didn't get.
I don't know. It's like, I think it's
Oh,
this
maybe it's
new.
just short for original.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is.
I mean, that might be helpful for our listeners because I could not figure out what are you talking about, OG? So the
Yeah.
original, okay,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
original couple. Okay,
Yes.
couple A,
Yes.
the original couple.
Yeah. Couple A is the original couple.
Okay.
So, and then Brooklyn and Keith, they're the second original couple, right? So couple B. All right.
Okay.
So couple A has been married for 9 years. And I guess a while ago, they started talking about the idea of an open relationship and what they would look like. And then they met couple B and they all started
Dancing,
hanging.
I think they were
Yeah.
all dancers,
Yeah.
right?
Dancing. And I have this video. I posted the link to this video in our previous episode, and it is also posted in today's show notes if anyone would like to go and watch it. It's only like an 8.5 minute video. So they all started kind of hanging out, and it just happened very naturally and organically for them. They became polyamorous. And so after only 8 months in this relationship, they all moved in together under the same roof. And they're all happy with it. They're all comfortable with the arrangement. And so they talk a lot about what that looks like and also about what it doesn't look like. And
Mhm.
so, like, one of the things that they said is, we've seen monogamous couples who've made it work and they make it work for 20 years, but we didn't want to just make it work. We wanted to be able to fully love each other and fully commit to each other. I mean, to me, I kind of got the impression that loving other people gives them the ability to more deeply love each other. Or I guess it seems like they all form this bond together and it all makes them closer and better people altogether. Does that sound accurate to you?
I had a hard time understanding what he was talking about,
Oh,
where he
okay.
said, because to me, I work with monogamous couples
Mm-hmm.
or couples who want to be monogamous. And I think the goal, at least for me in my marriage, is you have to make it work. I don't like to use the term work. I use the term
Yeah.
focus.
Mm-hmm.
You have to focus on the marriage. But I guess from my perspective, again, as you said at the start, you and I would never have polyamorous relationships. It's
Right.
just that seems very fulfilling to focus on the relationship. And at the end of, 6 years together, that feels pretty good. I mean, it feels pretty good at the end of 45 years together.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't understand what they were saying as far as the reason. And I think, the video is so short that
Yeah.
if they were sitting in front of me, I'd have all sorts of questions I'd want to ask them.
Right.
Like,
Right.
how did they come to the decision to move in together? Because you can certainly have a polyamorous relationship without living together. So it's
Mm-hmm.
important to say that is not part of what
Yeah.
polyamory is, because polyamory could be around marriage, it could be dating, and so it's not necessarily living together. So they chose to take it to a different level,
Mm-hmm.
which I think would be complicated and difficult because couple A has 2 kids, which we'll get to
Yes.
in a moment, but I think that complicates it a little bit as well. I'll go with your impression that maybe what they're after is just an ability to, I would say, expand their love or let their
Yeah.
love go deeper for each other. I mean, that kind of makes sense to me. It's just
I
I have
can
a hard time understanding where they were going with that.
and it makes sense to me too. I guess I have a hard time understanding it, but I also can't understand the idea of letting someone besides Curtis into my life in that way, right? And so, like, I mean, I'm trying to understand where they're coming from, but I can't really put myself in their shoes.
So here's some words that they use, but they didn't go into detail about it. And I've heard other couples talk about this, that sometimes, when we are in a marriage, a monogamous marriage, the other person may not fulfill all of our emotional and physical needs.
Yeah.
I have certainly heard that enough from couples to realize that it's probably true for,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many people, but I would guess that might be true for these four people,
Mm-hmm.
that they may have emotional and physical needs that aren't met by the other person. And so it's a way to enhance that or to get your needs met within, I would say it's a committed relationship,
Right.
the four of them. So it's not for a lack of commitment. I think the other thing that's important to talk about and to realize is that this is not necessarily, well, I don't know that it's all about sexuality. I think a lot of people assume that that's what's going on, is that they're having, wild sexual encounters. But I would guess it's very similar to a monogamous relationship. And if you look at in a healthy monogamous relationship, sexuality only represents about 20% of the marital happiness.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess it's probably similar, that there is not an over focus on sexuality. In fact, they didn't go into that. That could have been just the nature of the video, but it was certainly acknowledged that they were having sexual relations with each other, across couples. But it didn't seem like that was the big focus for them. It was really more about the emotional connection, is what I picked up.
I got the exact same thing. And I think a lot of it too is it sounds like they don't really want their sexual lives exposed to the world. Like I think most people are uncomfortable with that. And, they probably fall into that. But like most couples, there is a sexuality component, right? It's an important part of any relationship. But, or at least, so one of the things that I appreciated is they didn't just paint it as this picture perfect relationship between the four of them. In fact, at one point, one of them said, "Raise your hand if you get jealous." And all four of them automatically raised their hand. And there are things that they have to overcome as a group, like as an entire cohesive unit. And I think another important, well, maybe it's not important, but another thing to bring up is they call themselves a heterosexual quad. So I think that can be an important distinction. It doesn't necessarily have to be in polyamory, but
Right.
in this instance, it's only a male and female relationship. Like the girls aren't dating and the men aren't dating.
Right. So there's no same-sex, at least sexual relationships. You're right.
Yes.
But I think that going back to the jealousy, I don't know if you picked up, there was a particular emphasis on Matt, I think, who is the male in couple A.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe he has a special issue with jealousy.
Yeah.
So as I work with couples, it's all about communication.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in so many different episodes, right? The importance of communicating in intimate relationships. And I would guess in this context with four people, that you have to take that to a whole different level.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's all sorts of emotional things going on, and I think you have to be more direct and explicit with it in order to make it work. So the woman who brought up jealousy just, brought up jealousy, but I guess there are other issues as well. For instance, when, like, let's say couple A male is going on a date with couple B female.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to figure out the timing. How does that work? Is everybody on board with it? That type of thing. So it's not just, hey, let's go out on a date tonight. Yep. There's probably more, I don't know that you'd say negotiation. It didn't sound like that's what they do, but I think there's got to be more dialogue and openness about what's going on. So the communication, you posed the question early on in this episode, what makes it work? What makes it not work? I'd say communication. If you're not good communicators, and if you're not that in touch with your own emotional world, I think it'd be very, very hard to make this work. And I think you have to have four emotionally intelligent people together who are willing to talk and have a good emotional dialogue. Otherwise, I think it just would be fraught with problems.
It wouldn't work at all. So I agree that communication is going to be essential. You know what it's like. We both know what it's like to be in just a monogamous relationship and what that entails and how there's give and take and there's Like, there's going to be communication breakdowns. There's going to be disagreements. Like, it's not all sunshine and roses. I mean, and you and I, we would agree, we both certainly have pretty wonderful marriages,
Mhm.
but we have to focus. Like you said, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't like the term work either because most people don't like working.
Well, they don't
And
want to work on marriage where we're taught that it should be easy. So I
yeah,
like focus better.
yeah, I don't know. And see, for me, I mean, after 10 years, I feel like being married is easy. But
But for a lot of people, it's not.
right. And I get that. And totally sympathize with that. But I mean, that's not been my experience. And it's not that it's always like perfect. And it's not that every day is easy. And it's not that I have this perfect, like ideal marriage. But I don't feel like it's hard to be married to Curtis.
Yeah.
I feel like Curtis and I have a pretty easy marriage. Moving on. So, one of the things that one of these couples did say, I don't remember who it was, but they said something that both you and I talked about. We both disagree with. So, she said, it's hard to be monogamous in today's world.
Yeah,
And
female couple B. I paid attention to it because
yeah.
it struck me odd as well. Because I think if you look at the vast, I don't know the statistics on this, but at least half of monogamous couples are being saying it's easy. She
Yeah.
talked about temptations. I think she mentioned specifically social media, didn't
Hmm.
she? I think she mentioned
Yeah.
internet and temptations. Well, my response to that is just don't go down that road of opening the
Hmm.
door to temptation or, talking to people that you shouldn't. If you want to be monogamous, I'm talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
That's clearly not these people. So I disagree with her. I think that, if you want to be monogamous, it's pretty easy to be monogamous. It's a commitment. It's a
Yeah.
choice you make.
Yes. And that's what I thought about too is when you first get married, you're in love, it's exciting and it's fun to be married, but eventually you're going to have to make a choice to keep that same level of commitment that you
Right.
have. Because then we've talked about this before. When you first get married, the passion is very, very high, right? You have that very high desire. And
Mhm.
after anywhere from 6 months to 2 years into a relationship, that passion starts to die down.
Right.
And I don't know, I feel like at that point, though, you move into something deeper. Like if you keep that same level of commitment in that relationship and you keep that same level of focus and you really continue to invest in your relationship, you fall into something so much deeper and rewarding,
Yeah.
right? In a marriage. But I mean, you have to get there and you have to, make that choice. And not that we're saying there's anything wrong. Like we're not trying to come against this couple and their lifestyle.
Mhm.
We're just saying, I mean, we disagree with it's hard to be monogamous in today's world. No, I think you just have to make a conscious choice.
Sure. Yeah. But the other thing, it'd be interesting because they're only 8 to 9 months into this, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So I would really love to see an interview with them in 2 years, and
Yes. Yeah.
2 to 3 years and see where it's going.
Hmm.
Because that same type of drop in passion is going to happen
Yep.
in this couple as well. And so it's not about being married, it's about the commitment. And I say
Yep.
this to couples all the time. It's not, I mean, marriage is, it's a civil contract, but it's really about the commitment you have towards each other. And so if the four of them have this commitment towards that heterosexual quad, then I
Hmm.
think they can make it work.
Yeah.
So it's about communication, it's about the commitment, being open. And there are certainly guidelines that they follow,
Yeah.
which is true for, even if you have an open relationship, the only way that works is if you both agree on the guidelines and follow them. And so some of the guidelines, if in an OG couple they're having difficulties and they don't switch, they don't trade off or go on dates with the other person. And so
Hmm.
essentially what they're saying, I think, is you've got to be good in the primary. I don't know that I call it primary relation. You've got to be
The
good in the
original.
original
Yes.
relationship
The OG, as they
before
call it.
the OG, before you can then do the cross dating.
Right. And really, what it comes down to is your favorite word. They have boundaries.
Oh, boundaries. Yeah. Yeah. Boundaries work in all types of relationships. And
Yeah.
that's the only way this is going to work is if they have the boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think another point too is so couple A, they've been married for 9 years, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, I think couple B, they hadn't, I don't know how long they'd been together before.
I don't recall them saying.
I don't think they did either. But what kind of a committed relationship are they in? Like, I think it would be different if you had two married couples coming together to do this, as opposed to what happens if couple B
What's up?
decides, yeah, if they split up or if things suddenly aren't working for them. And where it's going to get really complicated is they have kids. So couple A has two very young children. And I agree overall, the way they're doing this with the children right now, I think it makes sense. And I think that it's okay. I don't know how it's going to work in the future. And I'm curious to get your take on this. So the way they've done it with their children is they tell their kids that couple B is a part of the family. They all live together. And so they just say, you know, they know they're part of the family and they know that we love them, but they're just referred to as their godparents. So it sounds like couple A is mom and dad, and then couple B is just Brooklyn and Keith, right? So they go by their names.
Right.
And they said, you know, that's working pretty well for now with the kids. But I mean, what's that going to look like as the kids get older?
So I think they are right that you have to be careful about how you explain it, especially around the sexuality piece, but the kids aren't going to pick up on that anyway. And so I think from a perspective of raising kids, I think the more adults who love kids, the better.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true in, say, polygamous cultures, that, you know, they have a lot of these adults who care for them. And they don't get into, say, how do you do discipline? Like, are all four adults in charge of discipline and setting expectation for the kids? Or is it the parents, that relationship? So there's some things that we don't know. So, you know, knowing that there's a lot we don't know about what they're doing, I don't see it as particularly harmful to the children. I think it can be beneficial. I think where the difficulties might come as they get older is the judgment that's going to come from either peers or the parents of peers. And so I think it's about how other people react to them. So they go out and they talk about, they'll go get ice cream, I think was the thing. And they feel like they're judged. I guess I don't understand how they are judged in that way, because they're just two couples with kids going out for ice cream. But I think she talked about some of the extended family and how they felt judged there. So I think it's the judgment from others that would be difficult for the children. Because the children are growing up are going to, let's assume it works out really well, and they're going to grow up in this loving relationship. And you could even assume that maybe couple B has children of their own at some point. And so it becomes this community. And I don't think there's anything wrong with community. I think we have a very narrow way in our culture of viewing what that community looks like. I think you and I have talked about outside of the episode at times how, we talked about it in terms of, because you have your father-in-law living with you, you know, a multi-generational household. And for a lot of people, they would never think that's a good thing to do. But again, culturally, this happens all over the world, where you have multiple generations living together. And so it's just a different way of creating the community of family and how you define family. And so if you are stuck on defining family as two adults with their children, that I think is the problem. I don't think it's actually what they're doing. I think it's the way culture and some of the people in culture and society views it and their definition of family.
And I think that is ever shifting. Right. So, I mean, if you think even 15 years ago, the idea of homosexuality as a norm, that was pretty foreign. And now it's socially acceptable for a kid to come to school and have two moms or two dads. Right.
Well, in some places, it's still not acceptable. Like I would say in Salt Lake City and in Utah, that's most often it's probably not acceptable. They get pushback, I would guess. But I've had couples tell me that.
Yeah. But I mean, I feel like overall as a society, I think we're growing and that's changing, which is a good thing. Maybe not fast enough for this couple, but I'm betting it's got to be something that they're at least obviously they're aware of, but it's probably something that they're maybe even starting to think about of. How is this going to affect our kids? And that is one of the things that they said they got judgment. Like, have you thought about your kids? And have you thought about how much damage you're going to be doing to them? And it's like, well, first of all, that's not really any of your business. Second of all, I mean, you're not helping. You're part of the problem.
I don't see that there's any damage to the kids.
Yeah.
So for instance, those same people who are saying, have you thought about the damage to the kids? I mean, I don't know what their opinion would be on divorce, but divorce damages kids.
Yes.
And divorce, and that's in a monogamous heterosexual couple. But, people do it all the time. And it's very, very difficult for children. So if you are in this intact family unit of these four adults, and at this point, 2 kids, I don't see how there's any damage there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so again, I'll, restate my concern would be, how does society, the larger society, react to them? How does the larger society or the school or the peers in school react to knowing that these kids are in that type of situation? That, I think, is a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that that's something they're aware of. And it looks like their kids are, I think one of them might be close to school age, like could be like preschool
They seem
age.
young.
Yeah. And so, I'm assuming it's just a bridge they're going to have to cross when they get to it. And I'm sure it's something that they're already aware of or they're already thinking about, right? Like, how are we going to do this? What is this going to look like? I think that's also part of the reason of why they did this video, is because they're trying to get people, they're trying to get society to accept, this isn't just some frivolous passing lifestyle we've decided in. Like, we're all adults, we're all consenting adults, we're all in this committed relationship, and we just want people to accept us and to accept the choices that we have made and to, love, not judge, right?
Yeah. And so I think the issue is really about the larger culture's reaction to this. And so going back to our theme, which is there are many ways to be happy. Mm-hmm. And I think as a society and a culture, we need to move toward acceptance. And as you pointed out, that does not mean we agree with or that we would do it ourselves, but there are people who choose to live life in a different way than we do, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the video is pretty clear. Nobody's being harmed.
Yes. Now, one thing I do want to bring up is, so they talk about how they get a lot of fulfillment. Each couple gets something different from, or one, like the male in couple A gets something from being with the female in couple B, right? And so they all get something fulfilling. And I just want to point out that you can have that same fulfillment and that same satisfaction in a monogamous relationship. And I don't think that was the sole intent, but they definitely tried to paint it as this is the only way to be happy. And I don't think that was
either.
Yeah.
I think in a monogamous relationship, the way you do it often is with friend groups.
Yeah. Yes. And that was my thought, is I thought, I have very fulfilling relationships outside of Curtis. They're just in no way, shape, or form sexual. Right. And I think when you want to be in a monogamous relationship, you have to be very, very careful doing that with, I would never seek a very, very close personal friendship with a male. Like, I would be very careful with that.
Boundaries.
Yes, boundaries. But I mean, but I have great friends whom I love dearly, who are practically like sisters to me, who I get a lot of emotional fulfillment from being very close to and having, intimate conversations with. Right. And so I think there are ways to get the type of fulfillment that they are seeking. But, the point is they found something that works for them and they're happy.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think, it works for them. They're getting what they need. That is not the only way to do that, though.
Yes. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I want a polyamorous relationship, and then your partner says, no, you weirdo, I'm not interested in that at all.
Be very careful about that.
Yeah. Yes. Like this is not us advocating that everyone needs to go try this.
No, that is not what we are advocating. I want to be clear. What we're advocating is acceptance of different lifestyle choices.
Yes. All right. So I think this leads us really well into next week's topic. So we are going to talk about sexuality. And so we're going to kind of talk about it from the two extremes we tend to see in today's society. And so we're going to talk about kind of the shame aspect that we often see that stems from religion. And I'm not bashing on religion, right? As a religious person myself, that's not what this is about. It's not intentional, but it does happen. But then we also have kind of the opposite side where promiscuity is the norm. And so we're going to talk about the problems with each and kind of how to find maybe that happy medium.
The
And
middle ground.
yeah, the middle ground. I mean, because sexuality is important in a relationship. And
Yep.
so it's one of those things that it needs to be talked about, but, you know, I think you can overshare about
Yeah.
sexuality.
Okay.
We will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.